Welcome back to another episode of SuckcessFull, the podcast.
I'm one of your hosts, Blake, and joining me,
I'm one of your other hosts, Justin.
And this is the podcast all about the not so subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in pursuit of it. Let's not waste any more time and get right to the show.
So I was very excited because I went to Target the other day. And of course, that's always a bad idea because you never walk out of Target without buying something. But I feel like this particular thing is very in the vein of what we're talking about today. And I loved it because it's my brand color. Inhale, exhale.
Okay, that is a unbelievably cool purchase. I agree with you entirely. First of all, it's unbelievable for today. So high five to you.
Yes.
I didn't know you're going to do that. I would say if I had an addiction in life, I have two: Costco and Target. I love those two places. It's so easy to not only spend more than you want, but to feel good about spending it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. But that purchase you made there, I think, is unbelievable. And I think today's topic is really important with that. It's slowing down, focusing, getting to it, even when we feel that we can't. So take it away, because I know you got a great story to launch us into.
When I first moved to Los Angeles, I did not have a lot of money, so things were tight. I also was in and out of jobs because I ended up picking up a lot of temp work or freelance work, and things were very unstable for, well, most of the time I was there, but very much so the first, I would say, year and a half to 2 years I was there. I remember because my friends were like, you need to take a break. You need to take a break. You need to take a break. So they invited me to go out to Playa del Rey and do a beach day. So I was like, okay, this will be fun, right? I'm trying to get myself in the mindset of I'm going to be around 5 people and I have to socialize and I have to relax.
I'm following you because I can relate. So go ahead. Yes.
So I packed the bag and all the stuff. I have someone watching my dog. We get on the beach, we lay out the towels because it was actually hot for once. So it wasn't freezing. We were actually able to have an actual beach day, which for those of you who don't know, that's very uncommon in California, which most people are like, what do you mean? But it's the truth. It's cold.
A hashtag fact. Yes.
So I'm on the beach and I'm trying very hard to be present. I'm trying very hard to talk to everyone. And it's one of those days, when you feel so overwhelmed and you're anxious about stuff, it's like Charlie Brown, you're sitting there and people are like, burr, 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 and you see their mouth move and you're like, what? I didn't catch that. And it was one of those days. They started noticing that and they kind of just left me alone. And so then I'm like, okay, I'm going to read, present, relax. I start reading and I'm starting just the anxiety, when you get that feeling where it's almost like a cat wakes up and it stretches. It's that feeling of anxiety where it's I'm here, I'm awake. And then suddenly it started getting worse and worse. And then the next thing I knew, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have a panic attack. I got to leave. And I got up and I had to walk around. My friend at the time, she comes over and she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm great. She's just like, yeah, that's bullshit. She said, what is going on? And I was like, well, I came out here to relax. And she's like, are you anxious about relaxing? I said, yes. And she goes, well, what's going on? And I said, well, I'm in between jobs, this, that, and the other. And she was somewhat aware of all of that, but it was more of the fact that sometimes when you go to relax and you go to step away, but you're too caught up in that process, going to a beach with a bunch of people or going and having to be social and having to put more energy into something that you don't really want to do doesn't help. And sometimes you get anxious about the idea of having to relax, which is a weird concept for me because it's not that I'd never experienced it, but that was just a different level. And it actually was so bad that I couldn't go to the beach for the first 2 years, pretty much I was there. I would get so anxious because I would start thinking about all the things I should be doing instead. I finally had to realize that it wasn't just an anxiety over the idea of relaxing. It was the fact that I had to redefine my progress and measurement of that. It was feeling behind and having to address the issue head on of I felt behind what I was trying to achieve. And that's where all of it was coming from. So I kept pushing myself and going and going and going and plowing through and overworking myself because I felt like I was behind. And at the end of the day, I was like, why the hell do I feel like I'm behind? First off, I should stop measuring my progress to other people. And that's the one downside when you live in LA. If you're new there everybody that, well, not everybody, but a lot of people there are very successful. So when you surround yourself with those types of people, that's awesome. However, sometimes you have a tendency to feel like you have to compare your journey to theirs, or you have to compare, well, they've been here for 3 years and they can afford all this when I still can't get steady work, or, whatever it is. And you start sort of getting all up in your head about it. And so that was an interesting whole process for me to have to kind of break them down piece by piece, the different problems, and address them, because not addressing it and trying to just relax wasn't working. Trying to step away wasn't working because it was making me hyper fixate on it. So I had to find other ways to relax that didn't involve being around a bunch of people or sitting on a beach. I had to do something that was a little bit more active. Like hiking really helped me a lot, because hiking requires you to pay attention in California, or you're going to fall off the side of a cliff. I would always bring my dog with me too, so I'd have to make sure I'm paying attention to him. So it allowed me to relax in a way where I wasn't overly having to use my mind in terms of I have to do this or that, or being creative or whatever. But I wasn't also so non-active that my brain would just go, because I'm already, I think a lot all the time. And it's funny because you actually said that, I think on our last episode, you were like, I forget how you worded it, but it was something like, you have a very active mind, I think is what you said. And I was like, yes, I do. And sometimes that is a blessing and a curse.
100%. And I suffer from the same thing. And, I think that for people that are driven, and I'll go to your place, you talk about LA for a second. So I'm going to say mostly in cities that are gravitational, like in New York, like in LA, places that you want to go to, that like somehow they have like a vibe to them that kind of like are magnetic in some way to certain personalities. I think it's funny because it's so easy to compare yourself, like you said, and to do that whole thing. Well, you did this in 2 years. Well, I'm going to do this in 1 year. Or, well, you had all these advantages. I didn't. People do all these things to weigh and contrast things. I think the perception, though, is false a lot of the time. And I think that's part of where I wanted to take this right now, is that I suffer from the same thing you do for probably 40 years of my life. And then after about 40, I started realizing that for me, hiking is relaxing, surfing, all those things that I have an outlet where I have to be present, where my mind can't be somewhere else. That is, I love going to the beach. I absolutely do. But usually being around people, even though I'm a huge people person and I feed off that, is stressful for me because I feel like I have to be on. So like when
and it makes your battery go down real fast.
Yeah, it sucks. And that's the exact analogy that I use for Kelly all the time. She's like, you love being around people, but you don't always want to do things. I'm like, yeah, because it's a weird dichotomy here of things. I bring that up because, when you're present, it's that release factor. It's when you don't have to think about those things, when your mind is active in some other way, that it really helps. And so when you think about someone else's success, it used to annoy me when I'd meet someone that was more successful in my mind and was younger, because I was like, God damn,
I went through that too.
I'm faster, I'm better, I've done more things. Like, how can they have done this differently? And what I started to do was take a step back and say, look, not only is my journey different, but I'm successful in different ways. One thing about LA that I find is really interesting is, I think we were talking about this on our last podcast or even before, about most people don't have kids there. It's a very weird place. And so if you are trying to compete and you've got 3 kids, you live a different life, you can't compete at that level because your priorities, everything are too different. It's how you decide to measure your journey. And it's also, in terms of the stress factor, it is realizing that what you think it constitutes an emergency probably isn't, because what I found too is that things work out. Again, not like you always think, but when I take time away and I clear my head in some regard, whether I go hiking or biking or working out and just about anything, it usually involves some sort of working out thing, or building Legos with my kids. That's another one I forgot about. Because you have to be there. I come back clear headed and I find solutions to things, and I start putting the pieces together differently. And the way I look at it is, I look at life as like a mosaic. And it's a bunch of tile pieces that are out there. You all have the same colors. You all have the same pieces. It's how do you put yours together to create this work of art? What does yours look like? Does yours look like a Jackson Pollock painting where you've done a million things, but you can't really tell what any of those million things are? Or is yours like this perfect blue, beautiful thing that all you've ever done is wanted to be a doctor, you became a doctor, whatever it is? What does your mosaic look like? And when I started looking at it as a piece of art, to me, that's when that transition changed, because I realized that my perception of art is different than every single person's out there. I can look at a piece and go, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I can go to Blake and she'll go, I don't see anything you're talking about that is horribly ugly and you're an idiot. You never say those things, but that's just, I think that helps a lot. And so when we start constituting, getting caught up here and start running through these scenarios of what ifs, they never turn into good things. The what ifs aren't, when you're in a stressed place, those what ifs become almost cancerous to you because they don't turn into things like hope. They turn into despair and they turn into negativity. And like in terms of stories, so one time back in LA too, this is going to my recommendation here, is I was totally down. I'd gotten out of this, like my dream job in entertainment, and things were just like in this weird space for me. And I was just mentally out of it. And so I think it was Sundays or Saturdays. I don't remember, but Eric and I used to go rollerblading all the time up to Malibu and back. And I was like, look, I'm going through something today. You can go with me or not, but we're going to go all the way to Malibu, down to Redondo and back. And he's like, ooh, it's like 60 miles. I'm like, we can do it. And we ended up doing it. And it was probably the best thing I could have ever done from the standpoint that I slept like a baby that night. I was able to do something productive with my energy. We both got a great workout and we laughed the whole time and we complained about it the whole time, like what a stupid idea it was. So it took my mind off everything. As I tell you the story, the first thing that I want to like stress here is the idea to remove yourself from that situation. Take a step back, because the minute you start realizing or worrying and you start saying to yourself, what if? That's like a red flag for me. That's like the big stopping point where I say, okay, look, I need to pause here because something is off. Something is wrong. I need to do something differently because I want hope, because despair never turns out well.
No, it doesn't. You said something interesting, and I'm just going to touch on this for a second because it's slightly off topic, but I think it's important to say. You were talking about how everyone measures things differently and all that type of stuff. But what's interesting is about comparing your success journey to somebody else's is that everybody's success journey has a different starting line and has different obstacles. For me, I've had to deal with ageism a lot. Sometimes being in minority is great. Other times it's not so great. I think sometimes when we are comparing, we get too caught up in the illusion of what is on the surface, not knowing about what's beneath that. I kind of think when you sit there and you say that somebody's success journey was easy or they had things handed to them or whatever, you're kind of disregarding whatever things they may have gone through or the work that they put into actually succeeding in that area. And I think we can dismiss that easier because it makes us feel better in terms of, oh, well, it just came easy to them. But the truth is that it doesn't really actually help your mindset with that, because you are putting blockages towards your own success when you have that mindset. But anyhow, before I get too far off into that one.
I agree with you, everything you're saying. The only thing I would say is that sometimes those success does come easy to people. Like, we do need to acknowledge that too, that sometimes dumb luck plays a role and sometimes you fall into it. And we shouldn't be dissuaded by that, because luck isn't just for them. It can be for you too. And so I just want to make sure we talked about that.
I agree with you to an extent, but I think luck is the wrong word, because luck insinuates that there's no work involved. I think that luck is not real in terms of there is no bad luck or good luck. There's only if you were prepared for the opportunity or not. And I think that's important to say.
It's coming. It's coming. This was your moment today, Blake. All right. You did it. You can pull a Costanza. You can walk away. You've dropped a great bomb that I could not agree more with, and I think it's 100% correct.
Awesome. Go me. I will say, though, of course, there are certain things that come easy to people, or easier, I should say. I mean, social media was like that for me. However, there's still a lot of work in the background that usually people don't see in order to get to that point. So that's just kind of, I like to remind people of that, because it's really easy to be like, oh, well, that was just easy. Probably not. There's some obstacle. Nobody just plows through life with no problems.
True. That is 100% true. There's someone has some sort of issue, but the funny part I always find is that sometimes what they think are issues to me are blessings. Yeah. You're like, what? That's easy. Let's tackle this. So yes, I could not agree more.
I'm going to say, you said something else that I wanted to touch on, which I think is really important when you're talking about going to Redondo. When you get caught up in this anxiety, stress, worry, or when you're frustrated, you have a hard time often sleeping because you have all this energy up in your head. When you do things that are active, that require you to step away, but still, because we've been talking about that, stepping away, but still kind of using your mind, in a productive way, it allows you to not only take that step back mentally and give your brain a rest from the constant cycle of what you're in, but if you're doing it in a way where you are, say, biking, hiking, those things, I think the reason it works for me is because it does make me tired and it makes me have to rest. Because when I get really anxious and things, I cannot sleep. And we have insomnia in my family already as it is. So that does not help. I will literally just be like awake thinking all night, and that really doesn't help the spiraling cycle. If you are somebody like that, I highly recommend pick up something like that, biking, hiking, those types of things that require your body to kind of push itself a little bit more to the limits, because it'll make your body tired so that you have to sleep. And not drinking caffeine too during those times is very helpful, because caffeine makes you more anxious.
I think that's incredibly true. And I'm going to tell you kind of a funny story here that helped me last week to this kind of thing where you're kind of out there. So I got up early every day like I usually do. And I went on a walk on the beach. I didn't feel like running last week. So I just went walking on the Strand and just walked. No goal, no objective, which was already nice. Like I didn't tell myself, I'm going to walk to that pier. No, I just was like, I'm going to walk until I feel like I need to turn around. So I'm walking, and it was, they had an AVP, which I don't know what AVP stands for, but it's something to do with volleyball, some sort of big volleyball. And they were taking it down. It was really funny because there was probably, I don't know, like a college-ish age girl and her mom walking on the beach right in front of me. And I was trying to have these deep thoughts, and I couldn't stop giggling because all these volleyball players are out there. And her mom goes, I can't believe they wear that out of the house. And she's like, what? She's like, when I was a kid, I could never wear a bathing suit like that. And she's like, Mom. And she just goes on this whole tirade about bathing suits and how they're not appropriate. And I could not stop giggling because listening to this mom and this girl, like it totally freed my mind. Like I was trying to have these like serious thoughts about like kind of like where I was going. It was just hilarious. Like it totally distracted me. And for about 15 minutes, and I finally actually laughed out loud, and the mom turns around and goes, did you hear all that? And I go, I wish I didn't, but I couldn't not hear it. And she's like, do you agree with me? I'm like, I see both sides. And she died laughing, and we both laughed. And then I went on my way. But it was very funny because I didn't expect the conversation. It was the most true and honest, hearing these two people argue back and forth, because I can see myself having this argument with my daughter, like when we're walking along the beach and go, you can't wear that. Yes, you can. Yes, I can't do it. That kind of thing. I can just already see myself doing that. And it was just fun, and it totally released. And so sometimes I think also when you're in those places and you go out without having an expectation of I'm going to achieve this or do that, and you're truly trying to be in the moment, it opens up to weird experiences like that. All day I was laughing. We'd walk along the beach and go, I don't know, that seems inappropriate. We just laughed the whole time. And it was just this stupid 10, 15-minute moment that really shaped the day and really changed it. So I think that also part of when your mind is really active and when you are set on an outcome and you are fixated and you're ruminating and you're in this zone, if you're able to go out and take a break, like you had said, for 5 minutes, I really stress like 30 minutes if you can, because 5, it's that quick release, but it doesn't, for me at least, doesn't give me that longevity that I need, because it'll give me that quick snap, but then I go right back to it. And so a little bit longer if you can, and be open to listening and to paying attention to things around you, because 1, people are funny as hell. The stuff that comes out of people's mouths are amazing. And 2, being aware of what's around you. Like you see things a little bit more differently. You take in different smells. You look at the world slightly differently. And that, I think, also helps to take you out of that moment that you are worried about. And then you can go back to it with a set of, I don't want to say fresh eyes because they're the same, but I'll do this. You talked about luck, not being really luck. It's being prepared when the opportunity arises. And I think that's true. And I feel like these moments, though, are preparing you for those, because you're more open to this. You've, like I always say, opened your aperture to new possibilities, and you're doing the work by not doing the work. And I think that that's part of it, too, is that we forget that in order to be prepared, you have to be mentally there. You have to be physically there. You have to be fed well. You have to be all these things so you can jump on an opportunity. And part of doing that is freeing your mind up to be open to that.
I agree with you. And being present is a huge part of that. And it can be very hard sometimes to be present when you get caught up in your thoughts and in your feelings and in your head. What's interesting too is because you're talking about the 5 minutes to 30 minutes. I agree with you. And actually walking is a great way to kind of get into that present moment without having a destination. Sometimes just even taking those few minutes, if you can't step away per se, coming up with an excuse like, oh, yeah, if you're at work, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. I'll be back. Like, what are they going to say? Like if you were in there for even 20 minutes, are they gonna be like, oh, why were you in there for 20 minutes? Because they're probably not going to want to know the answer to that of why you were in there for 20 minutes. So it gives you an excuse to step away where you don't actually have to justify it. And that's been a trick I've used over the years of like, oh, got to go to the bathroom.
It's a great one, but I'll tell you that in my younger days, I would tease people about that. Ooh, you were gone for a while. Everything going okay?
Oh, really? I've never, but you're a guy. It's a little different. Nobody's going to ask a woman why she was in the bathroom for 20 minutes. You know what I mean?
No, that is very true. That is 100% true. It's probably actually I don't think I've ever used that excuse, but I think it would work well though, because it's one of those people don't want to know, you don't care, and you can come back to it without having to explain anything. So I like that. I think it's really cool advice.
I use that one, or I've used, I have to make an important phone call.
Have you ever actually like faked a phone call? Like when you
were, yes, I have.
Isn't it crazy? I did that. Oh my God, I've done that so many times when I'm just like, especially with someone that's annoying me, I'll be like, oh, I got to take this, and do whatever. And I'll pretend to be on a phone call and I'll leave and I'll be like, oh God, that was the horrible thing. And I don't ever feel guilt about that though. It feels like the right thing to do.
It's a polite way to step away from somebody that you don't want to give your energy to, in my opinion. Because if you keep going, eventually, especially, I don't know, maybe not everyone's this way, but for me, it eventually becomes very painstakingly obvious that I don't like you.
Well, as Kelly says, my face says everything. So I may internally try to be like, oh, I'm listening to you. But outside it'll be like, oh my God, you're an idiot. I can't play poker. I'm not a good gambler. My face says everything the way I'm really feeling. Yes, I completely see what you're saying. If I don't step away at the appropriate time, the eyes start rolling. I start fidgeting. I start going like this, like, oh God, please shut up so I can talk, that kind of thing. So yes, you're 100% right.
Well, so one thing I was going to say too is overthinking and anxiety and those things are not problem solving either, because we often get caught up in that because we want to solve a problem. But you don't actually, when you're hyperfixating on stuff, solve the problem. Your anxieties are usually not based in any real reality. Sometimes they can be, but you have to differentiate between the anxieties that are founded in a real, actual place of this could really be a potential problem, or the likelihood of, I don't know, the likelihood of my house just randomly blowing up tomorrow is probably unlikely. You know what I mean? Like you have to be able to differentiate between what anxieties are like realistic and like concerns that you should be paying attention to, and what anxieties are things that you're just getting worried about up in your head that are probably less likely to happen. And I think going on walks allows you to separate that more too, because when you take that presence, because eventually your brain will start wandering as you're walking, even when you're trying to be present. But if you're overly trying to be present, then it gets back to that, like you get anxious about being anxious almost. It's like you get worried about being worried. You get scared of being scared. And then you just like,
Tasmanian devil it.
Yeah.
We're going to stick with, I think, the theme for this month. We need to put in a Warner Brothers cartoon character in these analogies. So you brought up Wile E. Coyote. I brought up Tasmanian devil. So we got to be preparing for the next one. What I think helps here with this is that my mom does this. And I noticed it's helped me a lot because I've seen it in her. She'll ruminate and just tear it apart to the point where it's taken down to like the roots of everything, where it could be, well, the Earth's going to end tomorrow. What? Well, listen, I've done all this thinking and this is Earth's going to end tomorrow. And she's not that dire, but it's like, it's helped me realize that the insanity of it, I guess, of, I don't want to be like, that's insane to think that way, but it's easy when it's you to get lost in that. But sometimes it's helpful to remember those times when you've seen someone else do it and you go, oh man, am I doing that? Because I don't want to do that. So that's what also sometimes brings me back to needing to go on a walk, to taking those breaks, to clearing my head, to working out, whatever it is I'll start thinking about, or someone will even bring it up. If you've got someone who's close to you, who you can see on a regular basis and can call you out on that, that's awesome too. Be like, you are hyperfixating. What? It can be that trigger to help get you change too, but not everyone has that. So if you don't have that, one thing you can do is catch yourself doing it and then find a way to get out of it.
Well, you talked about catching yourself and not always being aware. And I think part of learning that skill is starting to seeing the signs by being an observer of your thoughts and your feelings and because it's always a pattern. For me, right before I'm about to spiral, it starts with this sort of like discontent. There's a word I always use. I'm trying to think of what the word is. Restless. That's what it is. For me, I get really restless. Sitting still in one place starts to feel hard. Then from there, I will start recognizing that I'm thinking about the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And then if I don't stop it there and I don't start observing the thought patterns and the feelings there, then I will continue to where I will get myself so worked up that I can't see out of it. And it used to be that when I would spiral like that, it would be like a week to 2 weeks at a time, like a long time, which sucks. But as I've gotten older, I've started recognizing certain things and realizing how to get myself out of it. And it is largely, which is hard, you have to change your mindset about it. And you have to start picking apart your thoughts and being observant and trying to be more intentional with them. And it's almost like you have to argue with yourself, not necessarily to completely prove yourself wrong, but more to give yourself that other perspective and ask yourself, okay, I'm worried that I'm just going to lose everything tomorrow. Is that actually something that could happen? Like, is that true that that's going to happen tomorrow? No, probably not. And then you sit there and you list, okay, that doesn't happen because, well, I have my family, no matter what happens, I have this, I have that. And I think we talked about this in another episode about for things to completely fall apart, a lot of things have to happen first. It's not just like typically one thing happens and then suddenly everything falls apart. It's the same thing as when everything comes together. There's usually multiple steps and sometimes there's leaps and bounds with it. But most of the time, it's a bunch of small steps that happen. Some of these fears and anxieties, like I was talking about, being able to differentiate them comes down to being present in the sense that you're not only present in the moment with what you're doing and giving your brain rest from thinking, but it is being present in, okay, I just had the thought of this. Is that like actually how I feel? Or am I just worried because of A, B, and C? And being observant of the way that you're feeling and you're thinking. And if you can catch yourself before the spiral, that's the most ideal. Because once you hit the spiral, it's a lot harder to not have somebody else there to point it out to you because you get too caught up in your head and too far in that sort of thought process where you just sort of like fall down the bottle into like, okay, we'll use an Alice in Wonderland analogy today. When she like drinks the potion and she falls into the bottle, that's essentially what happens. It's like you fall into the bottle and then you get trapped until somebody helps you get out of the bottle. And sometimes you can help yourself. Other times you get so trapped down there because you feel so small that somebody else has to reach in and pull you out.
Listen, if you're eating Wheaties, if you're going back to coffee, I'm not sure what it is, but the analogies are hitting hard today.
That was a funny one.
It's awesome. And I think it's really practical too. And I think that for me, one of the things that you talked about kind of how you know that you're going through this, right? Like you talked about getting restless and all that kind of stuff. One of the things I realized is, and I noticed, and I caught this actually the day talking to someone and it really hit home, is when I try to justify things. So like, for instance, I don't mean like right or wrong justification in the sense of, that's not just. How could that be? That's unfair, all that kind of stuff. When I started doing that, I'm like, wait a second, there's something going on here. Because it's kind of a trigger for me. And it was interesting because someone I was talking to basically had two weird things happen to them. And they kept saying, once is okay, but twice that's unfair. And I'm like, I was kind of annoyed listening to that, not because they were wrong, but because I found myself being in that position before of looking at it right or wrong. And what I find is that when I get to that place and I start looking at it, well, that's not right. I've lost the battle at that stage because it's not about right or wrong. The universe in my mind doesn't look at things and say that's good, that's bad. It just is. And we add those feelings or emotions or whatever to it. And so if we placate those feelings and succumb to them and say that's right or wrong, I think that we fail in that test because we don't see the opportunity anymore. It becomes more about the emotional tug as opposed to the solution or the possibility or anything else that it could be. And so I think, as you talked about triggers, not necessarily triggers, but things that bring you into that world that that you're going down this path that I need to be aware of when I start getting anxious and all that kind of stuff, is that to me is a big one. When I start thinking about that, I'm like, oh crap. like, whoa, hang on, because if I keep going down this road, I know that this is not going to end well for me in terms of my mental state. So, okay, let's look at this a different way. And the other thing you brought up, which I think is so important, we have talked about it before, but I think every time we bring it up in a different way, is the fact of worst case scenario stuff. What I did years ago, and I don't do it as much, but it really helped, was when I was starting to get down that path of like dark, and I don't do it a lot, but holy crap, it's overwhelming stuff. I'd write down what's the worst thing that could happen here. And I'd only give myself one thing. What's the absolute worst? And it would have to be in the next hour. If I didn't do this in the next hour, what is the worst thing that would happen? And usually it comes down to the fact like, I don't get to take a break, or, something stupid. You realize that the thoughts you have of, you think about an hour from now, how dire it would be, because we're not doctors. Okay. I would totally, I give all credit to doctors. Like if you're in the emergency room, seconds count, milliseconds count. I get all that, but I'm not a doctor. You're not a doctor, right? So most of the things we do in life aren't as critical. They're important most of the time, but they're not as critical. So we are given the gift of time, thinking that way and saying, okay, look, the next hour, what's the worst? And then I'd go to a day and I'd say, in a day, if I don't do this, what's the worst thing that can happen tomorrow? And again, you kind of laugh at it at the end. You go, well, that's not horrible, because you start seeing the pattern of, okay, I have a day to fix this now, as opposed to this is going to happen. And so things start changing in my mind, and I start feeling more hopeful, and I start getting into that mindset of problem solving and hope, which I think is so critical.
You brought up something that I actually did not have on my list, but I think is so incredibly important. And you dropped a major knowledge bomb there.
Thank you. We're one for one. I love this. Yes.
Labeling things. So what happens is, especially when we are either excited or we are anxious about something, we tend to assign meaning to something. And it then becomes whatever it is that we've assigned the meaning of it to, versus that thing is typically non-biased. Most energies, like you said, the universe isn't, usually this bad or good or this or that. It is usually, the energy is usually completely unbiased. It's the meaning you assign to it, the energy and the feeling you assign to things that makes you feel a certain way or attract certain frequencies or certain energies. For example, you actually said this, I think, in our last episode. For some people, $100,000 is like a lot of money. And they'll be like, that's the most I could ever make. And then that is like the most they ever make, or below that. I think when you end up sort of putting these labels on things, what happens is not only do you assign meaning to them that may not be totally accurate, but you sort of create this like maximum and minimum vibration of what you're willing to accept or not accept. And it happens the same way with when you're dealing with issues. When you start assigning meaning to them, suddenly they have all this pressure that may not actually be there in the physical world, but you're putting it there in your head. For example, for some people, losing your job is like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose everything, like da 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 da. And you assign the meaning of like, this is the worst thing that's ever gonna happen to me. For other people, they assign the meaning of, oh, thank God, I could go do something else. It gives me an excuse to look for other opportunities. But notice how losing the job is completely unbiased. How I reacted to it and the assignment I put on that determines the outcome. And I think sometimes we lose that when we get too caught up in these anxieties, these worries, these fears, or we get too stressed out. We kind of forget that we are ultimately the manifester of our lives, in terms of we create the world around us based off of how we choose to perceive things. And when we're assigning meaning to things, sometimes it ends up hindering us in the long run, because it makes us imagine things a different way or in a different perspective. And so I think that's really important, of being present to try to like debunk some of that.
I think you're 100% right. And I think that it is funny to me, because like I have a friend that's at a conference right now. It's very funny because she was kind of in this like weird lost space for a long time. I want to say like 6 months. But it's weird. If you look at her from the outside, almost everyone would say incredibly successful, but she is very lost. I don't know a better word to say here, but from a vibration level, I think her energy is just weird. Like there's just something going on there. And so she's at this conference right now, and she's been sending me pictures, and it's hilarious because it makes me giggle, because this conference is really helping her, because she's like, it's showing you different ways to think about things. And it was really funny because she's like, you've talked about this, it's here. Da, da, da. I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's funny, like that whole it takes two people to kind of get to the point analogy. And it's very funny that she's kind of, her eyes are wide open. She's really excited now. And I think that with labeling it, it's really important. But also I think that understanding, and I'm going to go back to the point that you reiterated, and I'm going to say it again, that energy is energy. It's not good or bad. We have Oppenheimer coming out tomorrow. I don't know when this episode is going to drop, but Oppenheimer's coming out tomorrow. I'm so excited about it. Like, it's like, for me, the biggest movie of the year. I love anything Christopher Nolan. I'm going to go see it. But my analogy there is like the atomic bomb going off. It's just energy. It's an explosion of pent up energy. It's not being created or destroyed. It's just being utilized. And the outcome of it can be anything, but it's just an explode. It is what it is. And so I think if we go back to that kind of stuff, and we realize that when those atoms collide, they're not thinking to themselves, you know, they're just doing what atoms do when things collide at that pressure and that rate, they explode. And again, there's no good, bad, evil, holy, whatever. It just is. And I think a lot of the times to help with these things, to help get through this, is to not get caught up in that. Like, my mother-in-law was here, and she is religious to a fault. Everything is about God. God does this, God doesn't do that. Everything is about God. And it was so funny. Like, we went out to breakfast and she goes, "Oh, God bless the meal today." And I'm like, "I thought the cook made it." You know, like, it's like, sure, you can go down that road. And I want you to think that there's something else and all that stuff. But at the same time, you have to just kind of accept it for what it is and not give in to all these other things and be open to so much more. And so labeling it is really important, but labeling it in a productive way, I think, is the key. So if you're basically everything is from somewhere else, that's not helpful either, because some of these things you produced, you manifested, you did that as well. And so it's making sure you're labeling it appropriate so that it's empowering to you, and not that you are just a receiver, that you're also a producer.
Love that. You just dropped another one. That is so important, because not that there's anything wrong with religion. There's a lot of, in most religions, there's a lot of really great lessons and things to be learned there. However, when you completely detach yourself from any self-responsibility, it's usually when you get yourself in trouble. And that's why when I meet people who are like, "Oh, Jesus, take the wheel," I'm like,
Okay.
It makes me cringe. I'm like, alrighty then. Yeah, we're not going to be friends.
No, you've got to take responsibility. And I think that's an easy out to me. I do like the saying, because a lot of comedians use it, and it does make me laugh. And you made me laugh there. And you're like, "Jesus, take the wheel." Like, come on. No, you need to take responsibility. You need to take control. You need to step in there. The minute you give that up, it's an easy out. It's a very simple way of thinking in my mind, of just saying, well, it is what it, like, whatever. No.
Well, that, and I think we also dismiss the amount of power that we have to create our own world for ourselves. And if you have a complete lack of responsibility, where you act like there's nothing in your control, then yeah, nothing will be in your control, because that's what you created for yourself. Is that really the confined way you want to live, though? I mean, I don't understand that mindset, but
no, but
I always question everything.
But I think that's the healthy attitude here. And I think that's kind of that final point, is question why you're feeling this way, and honestly answer those questions for yourself. Because one of the things that, especially in Western societies, we're great at is not telling the full answer. Like, you started today with making a joke about being at the beach and "I'm great." You know, the minute I hear that, it's like a red flag. I'm always like, "Ah, shit. Okay, we got to talk more," because it's not real. And most other cultures don't do that. It's a very Western thing to basically say, "Look, I'm an island. I'm indestructible. I'm fine. I'm going to plow through this." When in reality, no, you're not. And the more honest you are with that, and the more you talk about it, and the more you accept it, the less pain comes with it later on, because you've dealt with it. And so when you're going through anxious times, or you're going through incredibly stressful times, or you're going through indecisive times, or you're going through a period where you're feeling lost, or all the above, which is what I call the shitstorm, be honest about it. And that's part of why people journal, so you can be honest and truly write it. And if you don't ever want to share it, you don't have to. The other thing is, it takes that stress off of you, because the minute you're open to that and you start talking freely and honestly, it's one less thing to worry about. I remember many times when I've stayed up at night, I'm like, why can't I sleep? Why am I still thinking about this stupid thing? It's because I haven't dealt with it appropriately, or I haven't dealt with it in the way that it needs to be dealt with. It's really helpful. Don't label it good or bad. Like, I had this feeling. It's just a feeling. The minute you start labeling it good or bad, you start putting judgment on there, and then it can't express itself fully because there's a moniker to it. You're not being honest. Just, it's a feel. It is what it is. don't label it good or bad. Just write it down, figure out how you want to solve it, and keep moving forward. And I think that for me is probably the final piece of advice I'd give today.
Yeah, you brought up two really good points here. The first one being that every feeling and thought that you have is not an accurate depiction of who you are. There's a lot, and I kind of brought it up a little bit in our last episode of default settings, but oftentimes when we go through hard things or difficult things, or even just experience in general, that we've consumed that energy, it becomes a part of us. We have a tendency to then think that just because we experience that situation or we feel a certain way or we have a certain thought, because it sounds like us in our head, that's who we are. And that's often not the case. It's usually your brain processing information and default settings that are outdated mindsets, thoughts, or whatever from previous, what I call timelines of like where you haven't awakened to the point where like that self-awareness or whatever it wasn't there yet. So these are the old things that it's almost like in Toy Story when they have, Woody has like the pull string, you can pull it and he says the same like 3 phrases. It's the same sort of thing. It's almost like whatever triggers the pull string, that then suddenly goes off in your head. And then your job though is to like, okay, wait a minute. Is that just like the original factory settings? Do I need to reset this? Do I need to change that mindset? And that's where I talk about like being intentional with your thoughts and feelings. It's not about controlling them. It's about aligning to the ones that fit with what it is that you're trying to do and acknowledging those more and taking action on those versus not taking actions on the ones that don't align. The other thing you said, you were talking about conflict. And I think the problem is we often think that peace means there's no conflict. And that's not really the case. A lot of peace requires conflict in order to continue being peaceful. It's just like you don't, if you just let anybody walk all over you and there's no conflict there where you're like, listen, you're not going to do this, then they're just going to keep doing it. And I think especially in the United States, we have this idea that, we just need to keep the peace. And we have that mindset about everything. So we just want to avoid the conflict because, it'll just go away. It doesn't go away. Now, there's times when the fight's not worth it and the conflict isn't worth it. You have to be discerning about that. But I think that sometimes that's the problem. We kind of get in this mindset of like, we have to keep the peace. We want things to be peaceful. We want things to be easy and harmonious. Well, in order for that to stay that way, there's got to be some conflict. That's normal, a normal part of peace. And I think people forget that a lot.
I think you're 100% right. And I think that's a weird truth for people to accept, though, a lot of the time. I mean, Kelly's a great example of this. She hates to fight. She is one of those people who will avoid a fight at all costs, where I'm like the guy who's like, let me poke a little bit here. Let me just see what happens.
That's surprising because she's a Capricorn. She must have other placements in her chart that make her less, because Capricorns are known for being bullheaded.
Oh, don't worry. She's very bullheaded. She's all that. She just doesn't like she'll argue. She doesn't like to fight. And the difference for me is,
okay.
She'll say something like, no, that's wrong. But she doesn't want to take it to the point where it's like, it's an altercation of some kind where people are like, feelings can get hurt. Where I'm like, let's see what happens here. I kind of like to, let's dabble here. Let's see what happens. Yep.
Poke the bear.
I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. Wait, I'm not touching you. Yes. That's me. And I know that it's not an ideal trait, but it is definitely one that I possess. And I think for people like that, again, yin and yang, there is no peace without war, because otherwise there's no need for either word. It just is. Part of the Eastern philosophy of the yin and yang and the idea of balance is important because it explains a lot of things. But also when we go back to here, though, when it comes to feeling and you go through all these things, I just highly recommend balance, not in terms of right and wrong, but balance in terms of finding the right, to your verbiage today, vibration, to hitting that place where you're comfortable and you feel back in your kind of centered state. That's where you need to get back to.
I agree. Well, I'll go east with you for a second here. The lotus flower is a flower that can only bloom with a lot of muck and mud, and it blooms in places that are very, like, the water's really dirty. And the dirtier it is, the better it blooms. But what's interesting about it is it can't bloom without that, number one. Number two, it blooms each like petal at a time. Ooh. So yeah, in Eastern philosophy, they believe that in order to be a lotus flower, in the sense that in order for you to completely bloom and all these things, then you kind of have to go through the muck first. but going through that muck will allow you to have the discernment of what is and isn't necessary in your life to bloom the individual petals, so to speak. So I thought that was a cool analogy because I came across that recently.
It's a great analogy. I knew about the muck stuff. I did not know about the individual petals. That's pretty badass.
Yeah. So they use it a lot. They refer to, oh, you're a lotus flower. If you're going through something difficult, they'll say that a lot because you have to get through the muck, but the muck helps you grow. So I thought that was an interesting thing. But the other thing I was going to say was, so sometimes though, when you keep plowing ahead because you think you can't step away from something, you end up hurting yourself more in the long run. So I'll tell like a quick story here. When I was shooting one of my television pilots, we were doing it in the middle of, I was working another job. Well, I was working 2 other jobs, running a company, doing that. I was finishing school. It was like all these things at one time. So essentially what was happening is because our location was allowing us to shoot there, but we had to do it when they were closed and they had very strange hours. So we were going there at like 4 or 5 in the morning, working until, I don't know, whatever 8 hours from that is. We would close out. I would have to go to school and then I would have to go to work. And it became where I think we were shooting for 2 or 3 weeks. I was not really sleeping and I was exhausted and I had a big exam and I was worried that we were going to lose the location. We were running a little bit behind schedule because we had run into a particular obstacle that required us to reshoot one of the scenes. So what happened is I got my production team down. We sat down and I was like, look, I'm worried we're going to lose this. If we lose it, because we weren't shooting in order, which is typical for most films. But for, when you are going to lose a location and you're not shooting in order, that's a big problem because you're going to lose multiple pieces of the story, not just one. We sat down and I said, we got to figure out how to solve this. And ultimately, we decided to do like a second unit director. So I had my other producer come in. She was going to direct those scenes for the day while I had to go take my exams and honestly rest because I was at the point where I was like having trouble being awake. We do all that, whatever. It caused all these issues. Things did not go smooth while I was gone. It did not run the way it was supposed to. When everything was said and done, nothing that they shot that day was usable at all.
Okay.
Long story short, the moral of the story was what we should have done, because it wasn't just me who was tired. Everybody was tired. Instead of plowing through, we should have given everybody a break. And so what I actually ended up doing was I called everyone to a meeting, everyone, cast and crew, everything. And I said, listen, I appreciate all the work that you guys have been doing, and I know we're going to lose this location, but I think everybody needs a break. We did. We took a break and then we came back and we ended up nailing everything out and we got ahead of schedule because I did that. But the moral of the story was sometimes you really do just have to stop. You can figure out the other things. We rewrote scripts on set. We rewrote the scenes as we were going. I literally had the actors even ad-lib certain things and it all ended up working out for the better. But if we would have kept plowing ahead, I think we would have really been in a bad spot. Sometimes you just have to do that. And sometimes like delegating is great and getting organized is great, but sometimes that doesn't work either. If it's something like everyone's tired or that person maybe isn't the right person even for whatever it is that you want to delegate. So I think you have to take it more the overall arching outcome that you're looking for into more consideration when you feel like you can't stop. And in that instance, technically, yes, we couldn't stop in the sense that we were going to lose the location. But by allowing everybody to rest, we were all a lot more focused. And that was part of the problem of why we were behind because everyone was so tired.
I think that's a really cool example and I think an important lesson. And more importantly, I think this is a great place to take a break and stop.
Well, Justin, as they say, all good things must come to an end.
Alas, they must. However, this isn't the end because next week, same time, same channel, we drop another episode.
So get excited because we're going to be diving deeper into all the topics of the not so subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in the pursuit of it. So join the conversation below and don't forget to subscribe.